Thank you to my Asbantium level patron Fallon Cortez for helping to support the channel. What do you fear? Why is every child afraid of monsters underneath their bed? Have you ever felt like you're being watched or seeing something out of the corner of your eye? These are the questions Doctor Who explores and attempts to answer in its critically acclaimed episode, Listen. The show has always been notable for its scary episodes and unsettling moments, but nothing quite tops this incredibly creepy and memorable episode. From an orphanage in the 90s to the last planet left at the end of the universe, this incredible story takes a step back from the usual action-packed chaos of Doctor Who, and instead takes its time to reflect upon childhood fears, complex human emotions, and the absolutely haunting premise of a monster so advanced it can literally never be seen or perceived. And of course, if you know anything about this channel, you already know that this is the exact kind of episode I feast upon and love to analyse. Which means, naturally, that's what I'm going to try to do today. So, without any further ado, this is a very deep dive into Listen.
Imagine a thing that must never be seen. What would it do if you saw it?
I don't know.
Neither do I.
Series 8 was Stephen Moffat's fourth series as Doctor Who showrunner, a stage where his predecessor Russell T Davies had gracefully bowed out. This caused Moffat to reflect upon just how long he'd been running the show and how the responsibilities were starting to weigh upon him. Part of him yearned for the simpler days where he was a commissioned writer brought in to pen compelling, self-contained stories like Blink. Ever since he'd become showrunner, Moffat's episodes had become the important ones, with a lot of significance to wider story arcs or big specials. Therefore, when Series 8 came along, Moffat decided to treat himself by setting aside a slot for him to flex his creative muscles once more with a small, cost-effective narrative, allowing him to prove he could still put out classic standalone stories like he had done under Russell T Davies. Moffat decided to write one of these so-called chamber pieces, so he could focus on exploring the characters and sprinkling in some excellent one-off ideas. And of course, he did just that, and it was an emphatic success. It's often said that writers achieve more when they challenge themselves with self-imposed limits, like putting the cast in one location for a whole narrative, placing an emphasis on their acting abilities, and writing great interactions for them. By purposefully making his episode on the cheap, Moffat was able to flesh out one of his favourite concepts: fear itself. If you're familiar with Moffat's Doctor Who work, you may have noticed that he loves the idea of seeing things in the corner of your eye. It gave rise to the Weeping Angels, it was part of Prisoner Zero's setup, and Moffat had even written a short story in 2007 called Corner of the Eye, about a humanoid alien species called floofs. Funnily enough, these are aliens with the ability to perfectly hide and stay out of sight, stalking humans. By the time Moffat wrote Listen, he'd supposedly forgotten he'd ever written this story or created the species. But from the opening of this episode, it's obvious that the idea was still firmly in his head. Indeed, the Doctor muses about such a creature possibly existing, something that has perfectly evolved to hide.
What's that? In the mirror, or the corner of your eye?
This is such an incredible concept, and the opening immediately does it justice. How would we ever know if such a creature could possibly exist or not? If something has evolved specifically to hide, there's no way we would ever be able to know it even exists at all. We've seen before that the Crephaeus is invisible to most people, but even then you could still hear it and see how it interacts with objects and its surroundings. What the Doctor is theorising is something with such perfect hiding skills, it could be anywhere at any time without anyone ever knowing or being able to point to its existence. It's fascinating to see things like the chalk moving to lend credence to the Doctor's argument, because it suggests that he's right to speculate that he's not alone, even in the TARDIS.
It could be with us every second and we would never know.
Listen was partially inspired by a conversation Moffat had with fellow executive producer Brian Minchin about what could be done with sound in Doctor Who. Naturally, this progressed to the monster idea I've just mentioned, an entity never actually seen by the viewer, but which is instead purely shown through the Doctor's own perception of it. Indeed, the protagonist becomes almost obsessed by the idea of being shadowed by this theoretical monster, and this in turn allows us to explore a lot of the 12th Doctor's characteristics.
How long have you been travelling alone?
Perhaps I never have.
Moffat wanted to question how the Doctor occupied his time when he's alone, especially because Clara wouldn't be a permanent TARDIS traveller. instead, just popping in and out here and then. Therefore, this gives the Doctor a lot of alone time, and it's the kind of exploration perfect for the 12th Doctor specifically, because he has this obsessive compulsion to know everything. When he's alone like this, he becomes overwhelmed by this innate curiosity, because it's as if he conjures up a challenge for himself, this almost unprovable theory he himself forms. I feel like this is the kind of episode that could only ever work with the 12th Doctor, because he's this slower, more methodical incarnation, a philosopher with a time machine almost, so he can't easily distract himself from that nagging feeling of being watched. He decides he has to find answers in one way or another.
Proposition. What if no one is ever really alone?
In order to test this chilling theory, the Doctor gets Clara to awkwardly finger the TARDIS to use the telepathic circuits. Yeah, I remember when I had to do something like that to get cast in a big movie. They never called me back though. But of course, due to Clara's date with Danny, she gets distracted and the TARDIS takes them back into his past at a spooky children's home. This whole sequence is really strong and shows how great Series 8's slower pace can be, because it becomes more about the characters and interpersonal storytelling than the big spooky scary moments. Instead, it can slow down and allow Clara and Rupert to properly talk and connect, rather than them just simply being characters chatting to fill time or serve a general narrative purpose. I respect how the episode focuses on these kinds of emotional moments and authenticity. It makes everything feel so much more human and relatable because it brings all the characters back to Earth. It shows us that they're capable of feeling all the same things us viewers feel on a regular basis. And it's also perfect for the episode that Rupert has had the same dream of a hand grabbing his ankle from underneath the bed, which is part of the Doctor's hypothesis because he claims people all throughout human history have had this exact same dream. This actually stems from a dream Moffat himself had as a child, but I love how he weaves this personal, unique experience into the episode, drawing upon that common fear of something lurking underneath the bed. Like, sure, not everyone has that same exact dream, but we're all terrified of something being under the bed. Sleep is when we're at our most vulnerable, so it's natural human instinct to be paranoid of something waiting to strike at such a moment by hiding underneath the bed, the one place we can't see when we tuck into sleep at night. Moffat had previously explored the fear of the dark with the Vastra Narada, but Listen feels like the natural evolution of that form of storytelling.
Guess? Everybody dreams about something under the bed.
Why?
Moffat creates the chilling premise that this dream is a universal human experience because it's not an irrational fear, there's some truth behind it. Maybe there really is something lurking underneath the bed, this perfect hunter becoming a silent passenger and hiding right where you can't see it at your most vulnerable. It's not even just a childhood fear. Most people wouldn't admit it, but even adults have these kinds of fears because it ties in with those natural survival instincts to fear the unknown and be wary of hidden danger. I absolutely adore the sequence of Clara and Rupert underneath the bed and feeling something sit on the mattress above. It subverts the fear excellently because it traps the characters under the bed, where they're more vulnerable and can't see the creature above, rather than, the creature being under there. Director Douglas Mackinnon spent a lot of time researching ghost stories in order to craft the perfect atmosphere for this episode, and he delivers in spades, especially in these unsettling sequences, with the protagonist completely helpless and threatened by a mere blanket. The fear comes from the lack of knowledge, not knowing what hides underneath, and having to just hope it will leave if they don't look at it. It's especially chilling how the entity underneath is blurred so we don't actually get to see whether it's a monster or a regular child. It's so brief and hard to see that it continues to emphasize the mystery of it all and focus on the characters themselves because they're absolutely terrified and, yeah, for pretty good reason. Speaking of terror, let's take a minute to talk about Orson Pink, the time traveller played by Samuel Anderson. It's interesting to note that Moffat always intended for this casting, but Anderson himself only found it on the day of the read-through. So he basically had to speedrun learning and familiarising himself with the sequences while he was on a train to Cardiff to, read through the episode. Despite this, Orson is fantastically characterised and acted in this episode. He's one of humanity's first time travel pilots, as in officially sanctioned and known, not someone like a Doctor Who companion, because if we include them, Orson ends up pretty far down the list. Anyway, Orson is trapped at the end of the universe on a completely dead planet because instead of being sent 1 week into the future, Someone made a bit of a mistake and Orson's ship went a little bit further. Imagine that though, being all alone so very far from home and finding out everyone you have ever loved or known is dead. That alone is enough to instill anyone with a sense of existential dread and terror, especially being there for 6 whole months. But this episode takes it a step further by taking a page out of Midnight's book, because despite being utterly alone at the end of the universe, Orson keeps the ship locked out of fear for what seems to lurk outside, only represented by ominous knocks. It's utterly terrifying because it's already scary enough at night when you're all alone, with not a single living being left in the universe, but to hear this sinister noise every night for 6 months? That's a whole other level of sheer unimaginable terror. There's no way to know what's out there, especially because, by all logic, there shouldn't be anything out there to begin with, since nothing should be able to survive at the end of the universe.
This is the silence at the end of time.
This part of the episode is absolutely fantastic, with a chilling feeling of paranoia and fear, especially as the door begins to open, despite the Doctor only unlocking it. And the cherry on top is that the episode never does answer the question of whether anything was out there.
There's nothing beyond this door but nothingness forever. So why is it locked?
I mean, Big Finish did their best job to ruin it by implying that it was just River Song and Jack Harkness trolling Orson for lols, I guess. But this episode refuses to give any indication of what happened. The TARDIS monitors conveniently cut out the Doctor's head wound could have been inflicted by anything, and he never gets a chance to actually say what he saw. These scenes and the cinematic spooky directing leave things just ambiguous enough that we never truly know whether there was actually some unseen threat. Listen creates even more mystery and intrigue because we never have any concrete evidence for such a monster existing. There are rational explanations for all the encounters. The Doctor's scatterbrained nature could mean he simply forgot about moving the chalk at the beginning. Perhaps the knocking at the end of the universe simply was just pipes, and maybe the blanket creature really was just another child messing around. It's masterful by Moffat to write all these scenes with such rational answers in sight because it makes things even more intriguing. For all we know, the entire threat might just exist purely in the Doctor's own paranoid mind. It's entirely possible that there is nothing there at all, no villain and no people to save. We're so used to the Doctor being right and accurate about things, but this episode poses the fascinating idea of whether he's completely wrong this time, and he's too wrapped up in his own obsession to admit it. It makes you wonder whether the scariest monsters in the universe are the ones we conjure up in our own heads. It's quite interesting and somewhat funny that the Doctor himself proves this point by stealing the night manager's cup of coffee. He gives this big spiel about objects moving by themselves or things like TVs turning themselves on, only to then be the person doing these things. He leaves the poor guy thinking it was some kind of ghost who stole his coffee, but it was just the Doctor. So yeah, don't worry, Casper's not out here getting wired. It's a great comedic beat, but it's also a symbolic moment summarising the episode itself, suggesting that these monsters are just of our own imagination. This is why it's nearly impossible to imagine any other incarnation of the Doctor being a part of this episode, since Peter Capaldi's standout performance creates such an authentic feeling of obsessive madness as the Doctor becomes fixated on a mystery of his own creation. The 12th Doctor almost becomes like some kind of stereotypical conspiracy theorist in this episode, always needing to find an answer no matter how much of a reach it requires. Listen sees the Doctor willing to confront the Ultimate Hunters with a fearless bravado, but deep down he's actually terrified, but he won't admit it. I think this is why he snaps at Clara near the end, because he's unable to admit to her just how scared he really is for no good reason. It's more than just being afraid of not knowing everything or having a villain he can't even detect. Instead, it's the existential fear of his entire lifestyle and belief system being founded on nothing but his own imagination.
What if the big bad Time Lord doesn't want to admit he's just afraid of the dark?
But a continuing theme throughout the episode is that it's okay to be scared, something both the Doctor and Clara explain during the narrative. At the core of Listen is the idea of children growing up to become the kind of people they want to be in the face of fear and powerlessness. It's like we see with Danny in this episode, Clara inspiring him with Dan the Soldier Man, a soldier so brave he doesn't need a gun.
Scrambled his memory. Gave him a big old dream about being Dan the Soldier Man.
It's obvious that her inspiration for this is the Doctor. but it does show us why Danny became a soldier. In order to overcome his fears, he tries to become Dan the Soldier Man, because that's the strongest and bravest kind of person in his imagination. The best way he can fight back against the monsters he was so scared of. It's a very Moffat-y bootstrap paradox that Clara's familiarity with Danny Pink is what makes Rupert become Danny himself, but it's a good way to underline this idea of our fears shaping the adults we become. There's also that brilliant speech from the Doctor about fear being a superpower, how it gives us the adrenaline to survive. However, I don't think this is just him trying to reassure Rupert. I think this is him actually giving genuine advice he believes the child needs to know, because that's how the Doctor sees fear, and this episode explains why. Because the Doctor followed a similar path to Rupert. The same kinds of childhood fears are what propelled him to become the Doctor as we know him. The man who fights the monsters under the bed and laughs in the face of danger. His thirst for knowledge and sense of epic heroism all stems from these very simple fears, because he wanted a way to fight back. It's fascinating to see this drive behind one of the most inspiring and legendary characters within the Doctor Who universe. And this is once again a bit of a bootstrap paradox, as he finds himself inspired by the same Dan the Soldier Man figure and the same speech he then gave to Rupert. Indeed, in a very surprising and somewhat controversial twist, the TARDIS takes the protagonist to Gallifrey far in the Doctor's past. It's interesting how the location originally wasn't meant to be the barn from Day of the Doctor, but production designer Michael Pickwood noticed that the set was still in storage. So the team shot the scene there, and I think this adds so much to the mythology, retroactively giving even more weight to the War Doctor's decision to end the Time War. Like Clara mentions to the young Doctor, he'll return to this same barn on a day where he'll be more afraid than ever before. Because yeah, it would be pretty scary to be faced with the prospect of wiping out your entire species in fiery destruction. I know a lot of people don't like these closing moments because it shows the Doctor's past as a young child, but I think it's a really great way to bring things full circle and humanise the character. It's not some huge thing that rewrites the Doctor's origin or devalues their mysterious past. It just brings the Doctor to an immensely relatable and sympathetic level. We get to see the innocence and fear behind the cool and charismatic exterior, so we're able to understand the Doctor in a deeper way.
What's wrong with scared? Scared is a superpower. It's your superpower.
At its core, Doctor Who has always been a family show with a huge child demographic, so I think it's a wonderful decision after such a scary episode to make the Doctor relatable for the young audience. It allows them to see that he was young and scared just like them, but he still became the ultimate hero. It provides inspiration and hope that anyone can overcome their fear and make such an impact, which is a very positive message to send. And whilst Clara's influence on the Doctor's past is a contentious topic for a lot of people, especially those who call this era Clara Who, I think it's a good use of the companion, especially one who has already had such an impact on the character's history due to her presence in the Of the Doctor trilogy. I don't see her inspiring the young Doctor as the show making her more important than the lead character. I instead think it's another way of building up their relationship and how important they are to each other. She's still his impossible girl and they need each other deeply. So this scene is yet another way of showing that dependency in their relationship as it grows and grows, ready to boil over in the finale and Series 9 after it. You can also see the trust between them as Clara pleads with the older Doctor to not look at where they landed, because yeah, she knows how dangerous it would be because it affects his personal timeline. The fact he respects this and they leave without him checking is a fantastic sign of the depth of their relationship, this unquestioning trust and faithfulness they share no matter what happens. All of this helps to underline that, away from all the spooky scenes and mysterious unseen monsters, Listen is a deeply human and personal story. This is shown specifically with Clara and Danny as we cut in and out of their horrific failure of a first date. It's really great awkward romantic comedy writing that continues to ground the show in reality because it fleshes out both Clara and Danny by giving them these detailed characteristics to the relatable and simple backdrop of a date. These scenes help to get the viewer invested in the couple because we get to see how their buttons are pushed, exposing their flaws underneath. It shows us Clara's defensiveness and short fuse, along with Danny's sensitivity regarding his time as a soldier. Into the Dalek gave us a general overview of Danny's past and the emotional struggles that come with it. However, Listen expands upon the backstory and introduces more layers to his mentality. We get to see how fragile his ego can be as he tries to convince Clara he did good things in the army, like digging 23 wells.
Whole villages saved, actual towns full of people I didn't shoot, people I kept safe.
It shows his insecurities, building him up as a character since he became a soldier in order to do good, but people only ever focus on the negative aspects. The date scenes are such a good slice of normality because they give us an idea of what makes each of these characters tick and what makes them people, not just characters. Both Jenna Coleman and Samuel Anderson provide a real sense of authenticity and legitimacy to this would-be couple who can't help but argue despite wanting peace and connection. From the cringe comedy to the drama, Listen carries so much humanity throughout its very core, and Clara and Danny are very important for that.
Yeah, well, do you know what I'm making now?
Fuss.
An exit.
This sense of humanity and the real world was something we didn't see much of during the 11th Doctor era. Sure, we had episodes like The Power of Three which delved into the home lives of companions, but Series 8 aimed to create a much more permanent link back to the real world. Something more akin to the Russell T Davies era, where we'd constantly see what was going on in the companions' personal lives. Clara and Danny's storyline in Listen is a very good example of this, representing that huge culture clash between TARDIS life and Clara's home life. Unlike past companions, Clara isn't a permanent TARDIS resident. She comes and goes between every adventure because she has responsibilities and a job to maintain. As I mentioned in my Into the Dalek review, the modern show has never been able to do a simple boy meets girl narrative like we see with Clara and Danny. A simple, genuine relationship being explored through work and dating.
You said you had a date. I thought I'd better hide in the bedroom in case you brought him home.
It creates such a beautifully jarring contrast between these events and the surreal chaos of life with the Doctor, something repeatedly shown through the excellent direction from Douglas McKinnon and some sublime facial expressions by Jenna Coleman, continuing to display the whiplash of this stop-start lifestyle. An interesting direction Series 8 takes the contrast between Doctor life and real life is that it shows the benefits they can have on each other. Clara's personal life is able to positively influence her adventures with the Doctor, since she can call upon her teaching career, and we see that as she's able to quickly gain the trust of Rupert in the children's home. She has such extensive experience caring for children, and it really shows as she comforts him, becoming a bit maternal in a way, which of course comes into play somewhat as Orson has the same Dan the Soldier Man heirloom, implying he's some kind of descendant of Clara and Danny, although later episodes basically erase Orson's existence. Whoops, I hate it when that happens. Time is in flux and all that, you know how it is. Listen is another standout episode for both Jenna Coleman and her character of Clara, displaying the feistiness we've come to expect from Moffat companions, whilst also carrying a firm undercurrent of gentleness and understanding. It continues to add elements to her character, showing how she's embracing more responsibilities and becoming more Doctor-like. Helping Rupert and the Child Doctor shows that Clara can't resist helping a crying child, which, as we know, was one of the very first character traits Moffat gave the Doctor when he became showrunner. And yet, on the other side of this kindness and purity, Clara is able to easily stand up for herself and challenge the Doctor and Danny when she needs to, with a streak of independence and self-assuredness for better or for worse. But when it counts, Clara is also able to take that step back and just, well, listen to them when they need her to. There's a lot of compassion at the heart of the episode, deconstructing its characters with a real warmth and understanding. Listen is bursting at the seams with humanity and the feeling of connection, which is one of the main themes of the episode and is explored wonderfully, culminating in the touching ending of Clara and Danny apologising for their date behaviour and then making up by kissing. It's an excellent payoff that highlights the importance of opening up to others despite how vulnerable it makes you.
Fear makes companions of us all.
It's scary to expose that inner side of yourself, but that's okay, like Clara's speech explains, because fear can bring us together and make you kind. You just have to conquer it and become the best version of yourself. Series 8 is one of Doctor Who's best series, but Listen is by far the cream of the crop in terms of the episodes of Series 8. A tour de force with a phenomenal narrative filled to the brim with fantastic directing, impeccable acting, and Moffat does indeed prove that he still has what it takes to deliver these standalone masterpieces that focus on depth rather than scale. Peter Capaldi puts in one of his best ever performances as the Doctor deals with this existential crisis and impossible mystery. Of course, he does have plenty of jokes, as usual.
Where is he?
Doctor?
I can't find him. Can you find him?
Find who?
Wally.
However, the focus isn't on the comedy, it's instead all about this delightful and fascinating deconstruction of the character himself. It's a story perfect for the slower, more philosophical 12th Doctor, whose relentless pursuit of knowledge complements the mysterious core of the episode. And circling back around to what I said at the beginning, a big part of the inspiration behind Listen was the sound itself, which takes form as there's less of a focus on music. Murray Gold's usual bombastic score instead becoming a lot more meditative and subtle, allowing for the dialogue and sound design to truly blossom and shine. If you hadn't already guessed, I would give Listen an S rank on the Series 8 tier list. Clara and Danny's awkward relationship drama is beautifully human, and the concept behind the unseen monsters is one of Doctor Who's best yet. It asks so many questions about the human psyche, where the monsters are only there because we need them to be. Listen encourages the viewer to draw their own conclusions about these many questions and its deconstruction of the Doctor's nature and the fear that drives him. It's up to you to take what you want from it. I definitely consider Listen one of Moffat's greatest ever works, and if anything, this episode is so utterly perfect that I struggled to write this video because it was so hard to put my love for it into words. So I hope you enjoyed this deep dive, and thank you for making it this far. And as always, I'll see you next time. And a special thank you to my Asbantium level patron Fallon Cortez, my Platinum level patrons Maximilian Foreman and Nick's Games, and my Gold level patrons Boots, Calvin, Daniel Shillito, Franz Horn aka Line Vortex, Herna Verzog, and Tom Azar. Thank you so much for your support.